Welcome back to the second episode of the Case Files. Once again, we are your hosts,
Georgia Scherrer
and Jacob Dougherty. Without further ado, let's get into the Carlsbad case of Jodine Serrin. Before we begin, know this episode details accounts of assault and violence.
Viewer discretion is advised.
Jodine Serrin was a woman who lived in Carlsbad, California, by the Dove Library in her own apartment. Her parents, Arthur and Lois Serrin, left the house for an evening celebrating Valentine's Day, leaving Jodine alone in the estate.
An unknown suspect entered the house and murdered Serrin by strangling her and then proceeding to assault her by beating and raping her afterwards. Her parents re-entered the house later in the evening to see a man in Serrin's room with her and assumed that they had walked in at the wrong time, leaving Serrin with the man.
Later in the night, after Serrin and the man had not exited the room to explain, the parents grew worried and re-entered the room to see what the problem was, finding Serrin brutally murdered and assaulted on her bed. Police later found the man escaped from her bedroom window and was now wanted for murder.
There was one suspect linking to the crime, David Mabrito. However, the only link that they had with his DNA was to a robbery that he was not found guilty for. So there wasn't any actual evidence linking him to any crimes. The only evidence that was left at the scene was from the assault on Serrin. However, because there was no DNA from Mabrito from the criminal justice system, because of that, the case went cold with no leads for 7 years.
After development in the criminal justice system, along with DNA development, a phenotyping of the suspect was released. The phenotype matched the previous suspect, Mabrito, which led Mabrito's child and wife to donate DNA to try to match him to this crime. With the DNA match from Mabrito's family, the case was solved nearly a decade later. So without further ado, let's get into some of the conspiracies and theories around this case.
So, do you have to consent to DNA testing? Should you have to consent to DNA testing? More relevant.
I mean, I don't know. Personally, my opinion on this is if you did this crime and you left your evidence there, what are they going to do? Are they going to ask you, can we use this evidence in our case? Because you left it there. You physically left it there.
Yeah, well, I think okay, so what makes me really confused is why, if someone's not guilty of something, what do you have to hide?
Exactly.
If you know you didn't do this crime, this could seriously set you free. If a whole bunch of people are saying, I know that you did this, I know that this was your fault, and there's DNA at the scene, and you say, I'm not going to submit my DNA for it, and
very suspicious.
You're just going to keep taking the abuse. Yeah, I just don't really personally understand, especially if you're not guilty of doing something, then what do you have to hide?
Especially in this day and age where technology is so sophisticated with DNA testing, and it's really accurate, and it's a good way to get maybe not charged with a crime, and you really shouldn't be scared of it or shouldn't be pushing it away if you didn't actually do it. But I mean, again, if I'm playing the devil's advocate here, I guess some people just don't want to consent to DNA testing because they feel it's their own, it's part of them, and maybe it makes them feel uncomfortable or something like that.
It says that, I just Googled it, by the American Bar Association, a DNA sample should not be collected from a body of a person without the person's consent unless authorized by a search warrant or a judicial order as provided in the subdivision of the standard. So you really do not have to consent to DNA unless they being the police, the judicial system, they think that you're guilty and search you for it. I mean, would you rather be searched for your DNA, have someone strap you down and take it from you, or would you rather say, I consent to this? And if you're guilty, so say you are guilty of this and you know it, if it's getting to the point where it's just having your dignity or not, personally, I would take my dignity and say, okay, I own up to this, I did this, even no matter how hard it is.
I mean, I personally feel it's a little weird that our society doesn't have a huge DNA bank or something where everyone's DNA is registered in there, so they don't have to go through this process over and over again. But I mean, I guess that leads to our next topic of do you own your own DNA? Is it is part of you, but like, do you own it physically, or does someone else have the right? Like, if you leave it somewhere,
you leave it somewhere.
If you leave it somewhere, that
like
came
this
around.
nice hair follicle. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's no longer attached to you. It has your DNA on it. Yeah.
I like to say you do own your own DNA. You know, there's like okay, so this is going to be kind of like off topic, but there have been a lot of, do you own any part of your body with pro-choice versus pro-life? Do you own your offspring? Do you own what you do with your body? We have all sorts of laws that keep us from doing things to not only keep us safe, but also to prevent harm to anyone else. So I personally like to say you do own your own DNA, which is why I just Googled it, which is why you have to consent to it, because it's something you own.
Yeah.
I can't, well, I mean, unless I were a thief, I wouldn't just go into your backpack and say, I'm taking this from you, even though you bought it with your own money, or you own it physically. It says your name on it or something, without saying, can I take this? Can I borrow this? You know, so I like to say we own our own DNA, but
yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I think if it's still on you, like if it's your hair follicle, you should have to consent to that, right?
Yeah.
But if you're leaving it somewhere, if like a hair follicle falls off, or like dead skin or something like that, I mean, I feel like it's no longer attached to you. It's like just evidence left somewhere, and they should have every right to test that.
Yeah, well, that's how they found Mabrito, was like there was DNA left on the scene, and if it weren't for his family, that DNA never would have been tested and never would have cross-referenced, and they never would have found him. So I guess that's another question. Should the family be subjected to donating DNA from previous suspected crimes?
Who knows? I mean, just from our last episode, we actually talked about about the Idaho student murders. Go check that out, by the way, shameless plug. They found this suspect by testing his father's DNA. I mean, because you can link, because your DNA is hereditary, right? It's linked from your parents, and it goes across to your offspring. Very scientific of you, Georgia.
Thank you. I paid attention in biomed. But I think, so subjected is a difficult word. Like, should the family be subjected to? The thing is, so with Mabrito, it was that he had died previously, and so that's why they asked the family for evidence. And I can only imagine how difficult that is to say, not only to have said in the beginning, hey, your family member, your father and husband is suspected of this heinous crime. Oh, by the way, he was found guilty because of what you donated. I
mean, exactly. I mean, this family, I don't think we mentioned this before, it must have been already going through a lot of trauma, because David Mabrito actually died of suicide. And he just left his wife and kids behind. I mean, just going up to them, and they have to be like, hey, your father, your husband sorry for your loss, but he was suspected of murdering and assaulting this woman. And now we need your DNA to test for it, to see if he was really the person who did this. I mean, that must have just been even worse. I mean, just the trauma on the people who were probably unrelated. They definitely had no idea that he did this.
But speaking of one family, like, also you have to think about the Serrin family. Like, they searched for the murderer, kept their eyes on this for 7 years, nearly a decade. And so I bet that they were very grateful for the sacrifice of his family, because without them, Mabrito never would have been found. They would still have been restless for years to come, and I can only imagine how difficult it is. So although it's one family's sacrifice, another family was probably saved from that and relieved from that guilt.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think they just wanted justice, right, for their daughter's death. They wanted to know, like, who did this, and just have some closure on the case.
Exactly. And so I think that sacrifices come at a cost for no matter who it affects, but also there's people who benefit from the sacrifice. And I think that it was a strong thing that Mabrito's family did to move forward from this, and to say, if we do this, then they benefit from it, which is why I would say it's, I don't understand why he didn't consent. But yeah, okay. So The next topic then should be, how should technology be integrated into police workforces, potential benefits and harms?
I mean, just there's so much new technology that's coming out year after year, and we're putting it especially into the people who are supposed to protect us, the police. I know they're working on robo dogs right now. I don't know if you've seen that, but they're kind of scary looking.
I just went to Los Angeles and I saw this little box on wheels with a face taking someone's DoorDash to them.
Oh yeah, I've seen those.
Have you seen those? And they're they run through the sidewalk and like run people over and stuff, and like, I'm sorry, what? I used to have to go into the store and sit there and wait for that. I sound so old saying that, but like sit there and wait for and now there's a robot taking you to people's houses.
I mean,
I know that has nothing to do with the police, but that's just saying, like, having to do with technology.
Like self-autonomous
everything changes. So this case revolves not only a lot around DNA, but a lot around technology, more than I think we give credit to. Like, when this crime took place, he wasn't found guilty for the murder, so they just scrapped his DNA. Like, I'm not the murder, sorry. He wasn't found guilty for the robbery, and so they just scrapped his DNA, which is why they weren't able to link him back to the crime when it was relevant. And now we would never do that. Now everything is logged and kept. As soon as you get an ID, you're on a record. As soon as you get a passport, you're on the record. So
I mean, yeah. And especially, they digitally recreated his face. Like, it's kind of scary how they can do that. They used his DNA that they found on the scene of the crime, and they outsourced it to this biotech company, and they were able to get a digital reconstruction of his face that actually really did look like him, and it helped solve the case in the end.
And so I think that, like we said, there are potential benefits, and then there are also harms. So the benefits are that we can save lives and we can find the bad guy who did the bad thing. But then there are also the harms that say we also can, that phenotype could have looked like a lot of people, and a lot of people could have been wrongly convicted of that.
Especially because technology is not perfect yet. It's like far from perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily fair that, like, we don't know, maybe there's an error when you're testing or like comparing in gel electrophoresis or something like that. And they don't know, or just maybe a technology error or a computer error. And then I'm sure it's happened before, and like it's just wrong, but they use it as actual evidence, and it could be maybe put against the wrong person.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that Mabrito. Okay, so although he was found as a suspect before the actual, sorry, I just had like a completely lost my train of thought. He was found as a suspect before the 7-year gap. And so that could have helped people say, oh, hey, the main suspect also kind of looks like this thing we just generated. But that could also make a huge distance from other people that could be suspected. And so you're also leaving out a lot of other suspects. So I think that it's difficult to give a ton of credit to technology, but it's also helped us in so many ways. We used to not really know anything about DNA. You couldn't use DNA in any crimes. Hair, that was just stuff in the way. Like, you stomped all over crime scenes and just hoped somebody saw something. And now it's like we see everything. I
mean, I feel like DNA technology has really just erupted into the world in like the past 30 years. Like, there was no DNA before this. And it's definitely been an asset for the police force to use, because it's just a lot more accurate way of finding suspects for things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, yeah, okay. And then should we continue investigating cold cases or leave more resources to the newer and more critical cases?
See, that's an interesting question.
I think that's a really interesting one, yeah. So saying cold cases, we would say that, like, Serrin's case, after the 7-year mark, it would have been cold for a decade. Cold cases are cases that have had no leads, no new finds and evidence, and of just nothing has really helped the police find any answers regarding that case in years. So do we continue diving into cold cases? For example, another cold case would be the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah.
People still, I just recently watched another documentary. Well, I say just recently, maybe a couple months ago, but watched a documentary about this guy that was convinced he was the Zodiac killer's son. And so the first 2 episodes are, they make you think. Like, I watched all 4 episodes in one night. Okay,
It's on Netflix.
Oh yeah. Oh no, it was on Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime.
And so I sat there, I watched the first 2 episodes, and I was like, oh my God, he is so the Zodiac killer's son. I was so convinced. I was like, oh my gosh, he knows who did it. Yeah, he knows who did it. And then all of a sudden, the next 2 episodes are with actual police officers and people who work, the detectives who work with the crime. Were like, his handwriting didn't match. There was no DNA from the scenes. He looks like him. So what? You know?
Like, multiple people. Maybe he's a doppelganger.
Yeah, and so people are still, the fact that case took place when my mom was a kid, and now we're still coming back for round 2 and saying, hey, let's make another documentary about this with the new generation. Yeah.
People just get so fascinated by it.
I think it's super interesting, sure. But like the Dahmer documentary. Yeah. That just came out.
After...
That was that was like a really 50 long
years?
Time ago. Yeah. I think that we just keep digging up, like, Richard Ramirez. I'm sorry, Zodiac, sorry. Netflix is a huge contributor to this, just to getting us all riled up again. But
maybe future episode topics, stay tuned.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, that's how I've learned a lot about cold cases. But do we keep investigating them or not?
I mean, there is success stories with keep investigating, like Jodine Serrin.
That's what I was just going to say,
And they never gave up, and 10 years later, they found this person and gave her family closure.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I think it's really important that we definitely still put resources towards these cold cases, because there's still people that it affects, right? Because, like, these families, the cases or their daughter or their son or their husband doesn't just disappear to them, right? So they want closure in their life. They want to know who did this to my family, and they want it to be over with.
And it's not just the families, it's also like the detectives who work on the cases. A lot of detectives get really strung up with this and say, I have to know, you know?
They pour their, like, hearts and souls into finding these killers because they want to, that's their job. And I guess,
So I mean, I think that it's all about delegating resources. I think that when something really new and flashy comes up, we tend to stray away into that more and say, let's pour all of our resources, all of our money into solving this case. And then we forget, well, what about the other people who are still suffering? What about cases that are just like this one that
there's probably thousands, tens of thousands of these cases
that happened years ago? I think that it's more just delegating. You have to be able to, and that's really hard to do, sure, especially with smaller police departments like Carlsbad. Just going, like, to school here, it's small. Well, it seems really small, but we don't have a lot of police here. Like, it is very safe here, but we just don't have a lot of police here. So especially with smaller police departments, it's harder to say, oh, let's delegate, like, we're solving all the world's problems. But
I mean, I just looked up something from the FBI where it says nearly 340,000 cases of homicide and non-negligent manslaughter went unsolved from 1965 to 2021. I mean, that's just a crazy number. I mean, there's all these people out here who just want closure on their case. We definitely still need to put some resources towards them.
I looked up last night, actually. Okay, so I was watching a movie called Searching. I sound like I watch a lot of TV, but it was really, I love that movie. And it was, oh my God, how many people are missing? It was, out of every, like, 10 people, 6.5 are missing. And I was like, it was something like that, okay? If you look at how many people are missing right now in California, let me see, in California, it's this crazy number. So, let me see. Yeah, okay, well, I was definitely very far off, but it was like California's rate of missing persons of roughly an average of 7.6 missing for every 100,000 people.
Wow. You're very close there. Like, very, yeah.
Very close. That's embarrassing. But anyway, so moving on to our last topic. What distinguishes, so we said leave more important more resources to newer and more critical cases.
Mm-hmm.
So what distinguishes a critical / important case from an unimportant case?
Yeah, I mean, because you're, at the end of the day, especially with these homicide cases, you're dealing with people's lives. I mean, you can't really say, oh, this person who was killed wasn't important.
Oh, yeah.
These people are important.
There's tons of huge philosophical debates about what is the price of lives. Like, how do you put a price on people's lives? A lot of businesses have to do that when someone passes. It's like put a price on what their work ethic was worth.
I mean, especially, I can talk about this a little bit because my dad's an emergency room doctor, and when they have big, like, casualties, they have to triage patients. And when they do this, they have to choose, like, who they help, who they don't help. And then, some people just can't be saved sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that it's not as much important versus unimportant. Yeah. It's what is most, I think it's time sensitive too. What needs to be found right now,
before someone escapes or something.
Serrin's killer didn't go on like a killing spree. It was just, as far as I know, it was just her. And then, of course, that attempted robbery.
And he stayed like right by an oceanside. Then like he didn't flee to another country or another state. He stayed like right by here.
Yeah, and then there's also then like crimes that are more critical that take place. Going back to the Zodiac killer, he was very infamous for making lots of threats and running around on sprees. And then like even referencing our last episode, although there are lots of crimes that go on, that was the most widely observed crime, not only due to social media, but also because multiple people were killed in this very violent occurrence where a lot of people also lived. Like, it was a huge campus. And so I don't think it's so much important versus unimportant. I think it also has to do a lot with time. And also how the public is reacting to it. A close-to-home case that was left as a mystery for over a decade resurfaces as technology and criminal justice labs improve and change over time. Thank you for diving into conspiracies and opinions regarding the Jodine Serrin murder. Make sure to check out a previous episode on the Idaho student murders and future files as well. This has been Georgia Scherrer
and Jacob Dougherty
with the Case Files.